Hello, welcome to engaging all students through productive talk. I'm Sylvia Kenna.
And I'm Gabriel Camber, and we're excited to be able to share this session with you. Allow us to introduce ourselves. We were blessed to be part of the University of Notre Dame Trustee Family STEM Teaching Fellowship. A lot of the ideas we'll be sharing today were introduced to us throughout that experience and were put into practice in our own classrooms as we received coaching through the program. We've been colleagues, we've been co-teachers, and co-presenters for several years now at Blessed Trinity Catholic School in Miami, Florida. We've experienced the true power of productive talk, primarily in our math classes and in our stream integrated lessons. We've personally implemented productive talk with students from kindergarten through 8th grade.
Before we get started, we wanted to take a few minutes to introduce you to our resource site. Please use the QR code or link below to visit our Google site, which we'll be working with throughout our presentation. Our contact information may also be found here in case you'd like to reach out and ask us more about productive talk.
Here's what you can look forward to in today's session. We'll introduce you to the concept of productive talk and discuss how it promotes student engagement and equity in the classroom.
We'll be sharing examples of open-ended questions and tasks that lead to fruitful content building discussions.
And you will learn productive talk moves that can be implemented in your classroom immediately.
So what is productive talk? Maybe they can give us an idea.
Nonsense what you're saying. It's just nonsense. It's nonsense.
It's insightful what I'm saying because this is legacy protection. Legacy protection. And even you agreed with me. You were baffled by what Belichick was doing on those last two games. He blew a home game in the AFC Championship in the last two games. And,
so what?
And can you tell me, can you show me?
Did he get to the AFC Championship game?
Can you? Yeah, because he had a home game against Kansas City. Yep, he did.
You know, here's the bottom line. You sit up there and you're ticked off because your Super Bowl pick ended up losing. You can't just accept gracefully. I was wrong about the Patriots too. You can't accept it gracefully. Yeah, you saw it coming, hedging your bets and all of that stuff. But you're sitting there and you're upset because your boy Tom Brady ended the Super Bowl and your Super Bowl pick was wrong. So my goodness, Bill Belichick messed up my Super Bowl pick.
Here's the question. Do you think this coach deserved to be fired the day after they lost this game?
Yes.
How?
Because Bill Belichick said so.
So this is a perfect example of what productive talk is not. We thought it would be a funny way to start off this conversation about what productive talk really is. And you'll see it's the opposite of what we just saw. What is productive talk then? For the purpose of today's presentation, when we say productive talk, we're referring to classroom discourse that respectfully leads to collective learning.
Research has listed several qualities of productive talk, which is sometimes called accountable talk. With this kind of talk, listening is as important as speaking. Students practice active listening by responding to what their classmates share. Students are taught and use productive talk moves, which we'll be speaking about in a bit. This kind of talk requires students to engage in reasoning and provide explanations and evidence for their thoughts. When all of these aspects are present, real learning can occur. Now that we know what productive talk is, let's talk about why this strategy is effective and how it can transform your instruction.
So why should we focus on productive talk? Why is it important? Well, the concept of productive talk falls under both constructivist and social development theories of learning that were brought to us by Vygotsky. These theories of learning are where communities play a central role in the process of making meaning. Basically, and simply put, children learn from social interaction, and that social interaction is what builds their concept of knowledge.
You know what that reminds me of? Have you ever had a lesson that you didn't really understand until you taught it? When you have to explain something in your own words, it helps you make sense of the concept. The same is true about our students.
It's happened with me, at least when I'm in a professional development and I have the opportunity to be able to discuss it with somebody, or when I'm learning something new, and I can really kind of work through the understanding of this new knowledge. I need that time to be able to kind of work around it and be able to express it in my own words to make sure that I'm understanding it correctly.
Another reason that we focus on productive talk is that it's a skill that extends beyond classroom use. It prepares students for the real world because it mimics how we actively collaborate with others in the workplace, community, and the greater world. It's a positive tool that promotes interpersonal skills such as conflict resolution.
So productive talk also promotes equity and dignity of each student by giving every child a chance to engage in that lesson, thereby enforcing a variety of perspectives in classroom discourse. Up until last year, I taught in a special education program in our school, and I could clearly see firsthand how our kids were really having a hard time sharing because they never were able to share when they were in a larger group with their peers. When we taught middle school math together, I would push in with those students to help them in Sylvia's general education math class. And it was really cool to see how, after being taught those productive talk skills in my class, they were able to transfer that and be able to do that in Sylvia's general education math class, even with the pressure of the peers who they used to have before in their classes.
It really was cool to see. And some of the students that would be so shy and never speak up before, all of a sudden were, taking over some of the group conversations. One final reason to focus on productive talk is that it's a useful tool for facilitating project-based or inquiry-based learning. So I'm a huge fan of inquiry-based learning and have found productive talk to be the perfect way to structure inquiry so that it leads to real conceptual understanding.
Yes. In a similar way, productive talk has been a major component of the stream integrated lessons that we've been implementing at our school. Kids really have been given those opportunities in the midst of these stream integrated lessons to kind of understand a little bit better what might have been presented and to help share what they know with their peers. It really is what builds collaborative conversations and really critical thinking skills, getting our kids ready for 21st century.
In order to ensure that productive talk is used effectively, a purposeful classroom culture must be built. Students need to know that although assessment has its place in the classroom, you're not evaluating their every thought for mastery of a concept. They need to feel like they have the time and space to develop their ideas without the pressure of your approval, kind of like you were saying you feel as well. This era of high stakes testing has trained students to be afraid of giving the wrong answer, but often we learn more from our mistakes than we do from always having the correct answer.
Right. That's true. And not just kids are the ones that feel this, but as adults, we feel it too. I wonder how many of us could say that we feel comfortable sharing about something when we're just not sure that we know the right answer. I know in my case, I've felt comfortable with people when I know who they are and I've had those interactions with them. That'll allow me to share. But especially if I don't feel comfortable with that group of people or colleagues, I become more shy and I don't want to share and partake in the conversation. So productive talk is both the cause and the effect of a classroom culture. Implementing productive talk in and of itself feeds into this positive classroom culture. It's important for students to feel comfortable enough to engage in productive talk, even though this can be a challenge. However, if we get them accustomed to it, they really do get used to using these productive talk stems, which we'll be discussing later.
So what do we think this class culture looks like? Well, in a positive learning environment, the class culture should be one in which active learning takes place daily. All voices are considered valuable and knowledge is socially constructed. So students feel comfortable sharing their ideas because they know they won't be judged. They learn to build each other up and they get excited about figuring something out together. I always really love that moment when the students start getting excited about changing their thinking and they end up determining the main concept before I've even explicitly taught it. When this happens, I always try to make them stop and think about it. And I have them recognize, like, you guys got here, you did this together. I didn't do anything. I didn't tell you anything. You were able to learn something new by building off each other's ideas and using your reasoning skills.
So you might be thinking, this sounds great and it sounds like an ideal classroom, but how do I get there? How do I start making this happen in my own room? So one thing that helped me is really setting norms in the class from the get-go. When we were in our fellowship program, norms were explicitly established to promote everyone's participation. So we knew from day one that we were all learning together, that we couldn't sit it out, and that there was a foundation of trust between each one of us. So these norms really helped us grow as professionals, and implementing similar norms in my classroom has really made students feel much better about opening up. We also want to make sure that obviously after we set these norms, that we're praising students' participation and that the use of their productive talk moves is constantly at the forefront, not making sure that they're getting the concept correctly, but that their behavior is correct in the way that they're involving themselves in our class discussion. So we can say things like,
I like how you used your sentence stems.
or
thank you for being brave enough to share.
so these are the kinds of things that really make it more likely for our students to be able to engage in the conversation and really ensure that we're not giving evaluative feedback, like,
Yes, that's correct.
or other things like,
No, try again.
those things really shut kids off and they don't allow them to continue to develop the thought process. They just feel like, well, if they got it right, they don't need to do any more work, or if they got it wrong, they don't need to do any more work. And they don't continue to build upon the knowledge.
So we use productive talk moves to facilitate the students' involvement in the discussion. Ideally, what we're working towards is a classroom community in which the students themselves are the ones running the discussion and the teacher just guides it by interjecting at very specific points in time.
To put it another way, the teacher here is really transitioning into the guide on the side as opposed to the age-old sage on the stage. This does take practice, so don't be discouraged if it takes months to get to that point. But you need to start by modeling and explicitly teaching these productive talk moves. Students should be expected to use these talk moves consistently. In the next slide and subsequent activity, we'll discuss this in depth.
These kinds of discussions use the students' own ideas to form a collective understanding of the big idea in the lesson. You'll be amazed at how much the students can understand about a new topic once they start building on each other's ideas.
So these are the categories that help students understand the different ways that they can respond to a classmate's ideas. It gives them a starting point from which to participate in the conversation. So things like when we want to add on to a statement, you can say,
I agree that there's a pattern. To add on to what Steve said, I think the pattern is that the fractions all have 9s in the denominator.
or an example that you might want to use or that kids might want to use to disagree with someone else might be,
I disagree with Amanda. The main point Jesus was making in his parable was that we have a responsibility to care for the poor.
another time we might want to press for evidence, and you might say something like,
Well, what in the map made you think that way?
or you might want to press for elaboration, and then you can say,
Can you tell us more about your thoughts on the color choices in Van Gogh's Starry Night?
and finally, the fifth type. If you want to press for clarification, or you might want to revoice what the other person said, you can say something like,
What I think I heard you say was that the copper wire would be a better conductor than the piece of wood. Is that what you meant?
and so as you can see, these different examples are from different subject areas where all of these sentence stems can be easily applied, and they'll help that conversation get moving along.
Let's take a moment to make this real for you. On our website, you'll see a link to a Jamboard on which you can read some examples of sentence stems that you can teach your students for each talk move. Then please add your own sentence stem in language that's appropriate to the grade level you teach. We'll walk you through those steps right now.
Once you're on our website, you'll notice this image on the right that says Productive Talk Move Sentence Stems. And once you click on the image, it'll have directions on the first slide for how to use the Jamboard, and then how to toggle between slides up at the top.
Once you're done, please return to this video to hear more about how to elicit student thinking and craft your own questions that will spark this kind of talk in your classroom.
Welcome back. If you're looking for a list of other sentence stems or of the talk moves and how they can help in your classroom, there's a section on our website titled Resources where you can specifically find a document that has sentence stems for each of the different 5 types. Now, once you've taught those sentence stems explicitly, your students have learned the different productive talk moves. It's time now to plan engaging tasks that will elicit the thinking from each of these students. We've listed some sample tasks that we found helpful in promoting thoughtful discussions.
One of these tasks that we wanted to share with you is called Which One is Different? In this kind of task, you have 4 different images on the same topic, but each image needs to be unique in its own way. So you show the students these 4 images and you just ask them which one is different. And you let each one come up with their own explanations and they discuss the differences. The key to this task is that there should be no wrong answer. Each image should be unique in its own way, and this kind of discussion will lead to a better understanding of the concept that you're trying to teach.
Another task that I really like is called I Notice and I Wonder. You can use this in any subject area and in a variety of ways. It can be done by showing an image, a statement, a piece of music, or even a process, and then have students take note of what they notice using their senses, and then what they wonder about what they're seeing or hearing. We then after invite the students to share what they wrote down, and it really gives kids the opportunity to share what they obviously noticed, but then what they wondered. Anybody can have an idea about something, and it's neither right nor wrong. So we continue to help students be comfortable with processing the knowledge and just opening up in that conversation.
One final task that we wanted to share with you is called Predict, Observe, Explain. These tasks typically work well with some kind of puzzling phenomenon or attention-grabbing video. So what you do is that first you ask the students to make a prediction about a topic, and then you play the video or demonstrate the problem and have them make observations as they're watching. Once they start to share their observations, then after that, they can start to explain what they think is happening. The great thing about all of these tasks is that every student answers on their own and on their paper first before sharing. So you're really getting everybody to generate ideas. And then you can even do a think, pair, share, and then allow the students to kind of share with a partner first. So it starts building up their confidence and getting them used to talking out loud in the classroom setting. Another thing that has worked for us is that when we do the think, pair, share, we can give the students the option to share either what they wrote or what their partner shared with them. So it takes off some of the pressure if they really liked what their partner shared, but not what they wrote.
You can see examples of all of these and other types of tasks in that resource section on our Google site. There are plenty of others that will really help to elicit student thinking and start generating these thoughtful kinds of conversations that we really want to have with our students. Regardless of the task that you use, a key component of planning productive talk lessons is teacher questioning.
We want to make sure to ask questions that will provoke active discussion amongst your students. These questions should allow for multiple perspectives and work towards making sense of the lesson's big idea. Questions should be structured to get all students thinking and making connections with the content. So why questions or questions that require comparison make for great productive talk. Typically, we would want to focus on questions that lead to higher order thinking.
We know that some students will struggle with answering these higher order thinking questions. So to scaffold student engagement, we use what are called back pocket questions. These questions should be crafted in advance so that they intentionally lead students to deeper exploration of the concept. You can think of these questions as on-ramps to the learning experience. Students just don't know how to get started, or they might freeze up and they might not get involved in the conversation. They might have a hard time understanding what they need to do. So these back pocket questions really help them start to generate those ideas.
These back pocket questions also tend to break the main question into smaller parts. So you might start by having students see what they observe about an image or a problem before they try to explain what it means. You can also craft questions that guide students away from common misconceptions. Another use for back pocket questions would be to push those students who are already answering the higher order question to kind of push them to go a little deeper, make more connections, and extend their thinking.
Now it's game time.
We're going to ask you to pause the video here again, and we've created an interactive game for you to play so that you can become more familiar with the types of questions that we feel lead to more productive talk. Each example and non-example will explain more about the question. So when you visit our website, you can scroll down to the Productive Talk Questions interactive game, and you can click through to read the different questions and their explanations. The questions come from different subject areas and grade levels, so hopefully you'll find an example that is relevant to you. Once completed, please return to the video to hear some of our personal experiences and our concluding remarks.
Welcome back again. Now that you've seen some examples and some non-examples of the kinds of questions that really will generate productive talk in your classrooms, we wanted to share some of our personal experiences in using productive talk in our classrooms. So the first thing that I thought of was confidence and voice. One of the most powerful experiences that we've both shared is seeing how empowered our students have become after using productive talk, like I mentioned previously. And we can each think of a student in particular who were shy students when class started the beginning of the year. They always struggled with math concepts and they really had little confidence in their ability. I'm sure you've all had similar students and similar experiences. These students were extremely apprehensive to share because they just felt like whatever they were going to say was going to be wrong. So productive talk gave them a voice and an active seat at the learning experience, reinforcing that the answer doesn't need to be right. They just need to get engaged in the conversation, really help them get going. The talk stems really help them get involved in those conversations. Throughout the year, their confidence grew and they became masters of productive talk moves, who now just wouldn't hesitate to share while growing in their understanding of those mathematical concepts. They were teaching others the talk moves.
One of my concerns when I started implementing productive talk was that it was going to put me behind and I wouldn't have enough grades. Maybe you can relate. I decided to use a rubric for productive discussions. I explicitly teach the different elements of a productive discussion and then print a rubric for each student, so I can keep track of their participation throughout the discussion. I found that it helps students understand the expectations and also allows an easy way for me to provide individual feedback. It's important to note that these rubrics, though, are not evaluating student mastery of a concept. They're really just evaluating their participation, their use of productive talk moves, and their reasoning skills. You can find a sample rubric that I use for my math classes in our resource site in the additional resources section, but you can also find or create simpler ones that match your content area and grade level, if this is something that interests you.
Another thing that I love about productive talk is that it's applicable across subjects and settings. We have personally used productive talk, like we said earlier, in math, in STREAM classes, even in reading classes, all the way from kinder through 8th grade. But we've seen it used in numerous other subject areas and settings and grade levels, and all with great success. Although they need to be adapted, of course, to become age appropriate, all these talk moves are subject and grade agnostic.
For younger students, or even just depending on the content area, you might encourage your students to draw pictures to help demonstrate the points that they're trying to make. So I actually used this in a productive talk math discussion the other day with some 3rd and 4th graders. And I had them first represent a word problem with a drawing on a whiteboard, and before they shared with the class. So the students were then able to compare their drawings with their classmates, and it really led to rich discussions about whether dividing 12 apples into 4 baskets was the same thing as dividing 12 apples into 3 baskets. Because the students, so they knew the main fact, the main math fact, that 3 times 4 equals 12. But the discussion, throughout the discussion, they really got to understand the importance of paying attention to the context and what the question was really asking.
Another thing is that I think it's hard for our teachers who are perceived as experts in their subject area or their grade level, might have a hard time giving over some of the control to the students. So productive talk is really more about shifting that control through our own communication techniques during the lesson. Maybe our own personal talking styles need to be adapted. And since you're not in an evaluative role in facilitating productive talk, you need to refrain from dominating the conversation, which is personally difficult for me. And you have to hold back. You have to refrain from showing approval or disapproval, even subconsciously. Sometimes I have a hard time holding back the yeah, and channel that into tell me more. Some other teachers might just have to channel their own control into crafting those thoughtful questions ahead of time. But it's really about knowing ourselves as teachers and adapting to be able to facilitate these kinds of discussions for our students. It can be hard not knowing exactly where the conversation is going, but the more you practice restraint and jumping in, the more skilled the students will become when it comes to communicating productively and actually having them lead the discussions.
That's absolutely true. So my favorite thing about productive talk is how it's a skill that students start to transfer into their daily lives. So Personally, when I first learned about productive talk, I really was not a fan. I thought it sounded forced and inauthentic. But since starting to implement it in my classes and with my colleagues, I've completely come around, and I now see productive talk as a vital skill that's useful not just for learning, but also just for communicating in general in daily life. A few weeks ago, the social studies teacher came up to me to tell me how her class was using productive talk moves. And she was noticing that her class discussions were going so much more smoothly than in previous years. And it was just so nice to hear that they were applying what they had learned in math class in their social studies classes, even though that teacher hadn't specifically or explicitly taught the productive talk moves in that setting.
It really becomes a way that the kids just talk in general, and they apply that throughout their entire life once they leave your classrooms. So we wanted to conclude our session by going over some of the objectives from the beginning and making sure that we covered it all with you. Did we learn how productive talk motivates engagement and equity in the classroom? Yes, we talked about how every single one of our students and their voices can be heard in these discussions. We're ensuring that all different perspectives are included and they are considered valuable.
Were we able to share examples of open-ended questions and tasks that lead to fruitful content-building discussions? We did give some examples, and hopefully you were able to find and add your own on the Jamboard. There are also more of these available in the resource section on our website.
Were you able to learn productive talk moves that can be implemented in your classroom immediately? Oh, we hope that as teachers who have been to many professional developments, that what we did today was easy enough for you to start tomorrow, maybe. We hope that some of the activities or the game or the Jamboard really were able to help you take something away from the lesson.
And just remember that by implementing it tomorrow doesn't mean that you're expected to be perfect at it tomorrow. It is a process that takes time, and every little step towards that makes a difference. Thank you for listening to us share something that has transformed our classes. We hope that you have found it beneficial. Know that we remain available to discuss productive talk further. You can send us a message through the NCEA convention portal or email us. Our contact information is on the Google site.
Please complete the exit ticket located on our Google site in order to reflect on today's presentation, which is also a vital part of productive talk itself. This exit slip will also help us adapt the session in the future and to maybe connect with you to support more productive talk in your classroom. Thank you for spending this time with us. Thank you for allowing us to share about what productive talk is and what it's done for us.
We hope this session has inspired you to begin implementing productive talk in your classroom. Thanks again.